Before we start, hit that subscribe to support the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Colonel James Mitchell, and I'm 94 years old. For 76 years, I've carried a burden that has eaten away at my soul, like acid through steel. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about reality, about faith, about the very nature of existence itself. I served as a materials analysis officer at Roswell Army Air Field in New Mexico during the summer of 1947, and what I witnessed in those desert hangars didn't just change military history. It shattered my understanding of God, humanity, and our place in the universe. You need to understand something right now. I'm not some conspiracy theorist spinning tales for attention. I'm not one of those people who sees flying saucers in every weather balloon. I'm a career military officer who spent 30 years serving this country with distinction, rising through the ranks based on competence and integrity. I have medals gathering dust in my closet and commendations signed by generals whose names you'd recognize. But when I think about those 3 weeks in July 1947, none of that matters anymore. Because what I touched with my own hands, what I analyzed with instruments that couldn't explain it, what I witnessed being loaded onto unmarked trucks in the dead of night, proved that everything I'd been taught about the world was fundamentally incomplete. I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, maybe 6 months left according to the doctors. My wife Margaret passed 2 years ago. My children are grown with families of their own. And sitting here in this retirement home in Arizona, watching the desert sunset that reminds me too much of New Mexico, I've decided some truths are too important to take to the grave. The people who swore me to secrecy are long dead. The classification stamps have no power over a man who won't live to see Christmas. And maybe, just maybe, humanity deserves to know what really happened in that desert all those decades ago. When we returned from the crash site, they sat us down in a concrete room beneath the main hangar. The men in suits, not uniforms, made us sign papers that weren't your standard military confidentiality agreements. These were contracts that made one thing crystal clear. If you talk, the consequences extend far beyond your own life. They never directly threatened our families, but they chose their words so carefully that the implications were unmistakable. For years afterward, I had nightmares. I'd wake up in cold sweats with Margaret shaking me awake, asking what was wrong. I could never tell her. How do you explain to someone you love that the universe they think they understand is built on foundations of sand? I lost 4 colleagues from that recovery operation in the first decade after we returned. Lieutenant Davidson supposedly had a heart attack at age 32. Captain Rodriguez died in a hunting accident that made no sense to anyone who knew him. Major Thompson just vanished one day, left his car running in a parking lot, never found the body. Sergeant Williams was found hanging in his garage, but Williams was the most optimistic man I'd ever known, had just gotten engaged to his sweetheart. Coincidence? Maybe. But when you sign those papers, when you look into the eyes of the men handing you that pen, you understand exactly what price silence carries. And you understand what happens when that silence breaks. So, why am I talking now? Simple, I'm dying anyway. The cancer will get me before they have a chance to. Margaret is gone, so they can't hurt her. My kids have their own lives, their own protection. And honestly, after carrying this weight for 3/4 of a century, I'd rather die knowing I tried to do the right thing. What I'm about to tell you isn't science fiction. This isn't some elaborate hoax or attention-seeking fantasy. This is what I saw with my own 2 eyes, what I touched with my own hands, what I analyzed with instruments that couldn't make sense of what they were measuring in the New Mexico desert during the summer that changed everything. It was July 14th, 1947. I was 26 years old, a first lieutenant fresh out of MIT with a degree in metallurgical engineering. The Army had assigned me to Roswell Army Air Field to analyze materials for the atomic weapons program. It was cutting-edge work, examining new alloys and composites that could withstand the extreme conditions of nuclear testing. I thought I was on the frontier of materials science, working with the most advanced substances known to human engineering. I had no idea how primitive our understanding really was. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in the laboratory examining titanium samples when Colonel Blanchard's aide appeared at my door. The colonel wanted to see me immediately. No explanation, no context, just report to his office within 10 minutes. When I arrived, 3 men in civilian clothes were standing behind Blanchard's desk. Dark suits, unremarkable faces, eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. No introductions, no pleasantries, just business. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Blanchard said without preamble, "you've been selected for a special assignment of critical importance to national security. These gentlemen will brief you on the details. What I need to know right now is whether you can handle classified materials analysis under conditions of absolute secrecy. Your answer determines whether you leave this room with a career or whether your military service ends today. No pressure, no time to think, just a choice that would define the rest of my life." "I accept, sir," I said, because what else could I say? A young lieutenant doesn't refuse a direct order from a full colonel, especially not with civilian oversight watching every word. One of the suits opened a briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photographs that made my blood run cold. Wreckage scattered across desert terrain, but not wreckage from any aircraft I'd ever seen. The debris was twisted and scattered, but the shapes were wrong. The materials clearly unlike anything in our inventory. And there, in the center of one photograph, was something that looked almost like a body, but elongated, disproportionate, definitely not human. "You deploy in 2 hours," the suit said. "Crash site is 40 miles northwest of Roswell. Your job is to analyze any materials recovered and provide immediate assessment of composition, origin, and potential applications. Everything you see, everything you touch, everything you conclude, remains classified at levels above top secret. Clear." The next 2 hours were a blur of preparation and growing dread. I gathered my analysis equipment, portable spectrometers, hardness testing tools, chemical reagent kits, everything I might need for field materials analysis, but as I loaded the truck, my hands were shaking. Those photographs had shown something that challenged every assumption I'd made about reality. Either we were dealing with incredibly advanced foreign technology that made our best engineering look primitive, or we were dealing with something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught about physics, chemistry, and the fundamental laws of the universe. The drive to the crash site took us deep into the desert, following unmarked roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The landscape was harsh and empty, nothing but scrub brush and rocky outcroppings under a merciless sun. But as we approached the coordinates, I could see activity ahead. Military vehicles, personnel in hazmat suits, equipment I didn't recognize. And at the center of it all, scattered across maybe 2 acres of desert floor, was debris unlike anything I'd ever seen in my life. The pieces ranged from fragments the size of coins to sections larger than automobile doors. But it wasn't the size that caught my attention. It was the material itself. Even from a distance, I could see it had properties that defied immediate explanation. Some pieces seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Others appeared to shift color depending on the viewing angle. And there was something about the way the larger sections lay on the ground that suggested they were far lighter than their size would indicate. As we got closer, I could see the recovery teams working with extreme caution, treating each piece of debris like it might explode or contaminate them. The site commander, a major I didn't recognize, briefed our analysis team quickly. No unnecessary contact with the materials. All analysis to be conducted using remote methods when possible. Any direct handling to be done with full protective equipment. And absolutely no speculation about origin or purpose to be recorded in official reports. The first piece I examined changed everything I thought I knew about materials science. It was roughly the size of a dinner plate, maybe 3 feet long and 18 inches wide. But when I tried to lift it, the weight was all wrong. The fragment should have weighed at least 40 pounds based on its dimensions, but I could lift it with one hand. It felt like it weighed maybe 5 pounds. Yet when I tapped it with my testing hammer, it rang like a church bell, producing harmonics that seemed to go on forever. Under magnification, the surface showed no tool marks, no manufacturing patterns, No evidence of any fabrication process I recognized. The material appeared to be seamless, as if the entire piece had been formed as a single unit rather than assembled from components. But that was impossible. No manufacturing technique existed that could create something like this. Even our most advanced casting and forging processes left microscopic evidence of their methods. This showed nothing. The spectrometer readings were equally baffling. The material didn't match any known element or alloy in our databases. When I subjected it to chemical analysis, the reagents simply rolled off like water off glass, refusing to interact with the surface. Temperature testing showed it remained cool to the touch, even under direct sunlight. Yet when I tried to heat a small sample with a blowtorch, the flame seemed to bend around it without raising the temperature by a single degree. But it was the electrical properties that really shattered my understanding. When I connected leads from our field generator, the material didn't just conduct electricity. It seemed to amplify it, storing energy in ways that violated every principle of electrical engineering I'd studied. A 1-volt input would produce a 3-volt output, with no apparent power source for the additional energy. The implications were staggering. If we could understand and replicate this effect, it would revolutionize every electrical system on Earth. Dr. Kellerman, our senior physicist, was examining a larger section about 20 feet away. I watched him run the same tests I was conducting, saw his expression grow more confused with each measurement. He kept recalibrating his instruments, clearly convinced his equipment was malfunctioning. Finally, he walked over to my station, his face pale with confusion. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "are you getting readings that make absolutely no sense?" I nodded, showing him my data. The material was exhibiting properties that shouldn't exist according to known physics. Kellerman looked around to make sure none of the suits were within earshot, then leaned closer. "This isn't from any laboratory on Earth," he whispered. "The atomic structure alone would require manufacturing techniques we won't develop for decades, maybe centuries." As the day progressed, we collected samples from dozens of fragments scattered across the site. Each piece showed the same impossible properties. Lightweight yet incredibly strong, resistant to heat and chemical interaction, capable of electrical effects that defied explanation. Some fragments showed evidence of having been part of larger structures, with connection points that suggested assembly methods we couldn't comprehend. The strangest discovery came when I examined what appeared to be a control panel fragment. The surface was covered with symbols that definitely weren't letters or numbers from any human language. They seemed to be etched into the material itself, not painted or engraved, as if they were part of the atomic structure. Under ultraviolet light, the symbols glowed with a faint blue radiance, pulsing in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic, almost alive. When I touched the surface near the symbols, something extraordinary happened. The material warmed under my fingers, and the symbols began to glow brighter. For just a moment, I felt something like an electrical tingle, not painful but definitely present, as if the fragment was responding to my touch. I jerked my hand away, looking around to see if anyone had noticed. But the other analysts were absorbed in their own examinations, equally bewildered by what they were finding. That evening, back at the base, we compiled our preliminary reports in a secure facility guarded by personnel I'd never seen before. The official conclusion was that we'd recovered debris from an experimental aircraft of unknown origin, possibly foreign technology far in advance of American capabilities. But privately, among the analysis team, we knew that explanation was insufficient. No nation on Earth possessed technology this advanced. The materials we'd examined represented a level of engineering sophistication that shouldn't exist anywhere in our solar system. The real shock came 3 days later when they brought in the bodies. I wasn't supposed to see them, wasn't authorized for biological analysis, but I was working late in the materials lab when they wheeled them past my window. 3 gurneys covered with sheets, but the proportions underneath those covers were all wrong. Too small, too thin, limbs that seemed elongated compared to human anatomy. One sheet had slipped slightly, revealing a hand that definitely wasn't human. 4 fingers instead of 5, skin with a grayish, translucent quality, fingertips that appeared to have some kind of ridge patterns unlike human fingerprints. Dr. Morrison, the base medical officer, emerged from the examination room looking like he'd seen something that challenged his understanding of biology. When he noticed me watching through the window, his expression went cold. He walked over and pulled the blinds shut, but not before I saw him cross himself, something I'd never seen the man do in 3 years of working together. The cover-up began immediately. Within a week, the official story had changed. Weather balloon, experimental military equipment, nothing more exciting than classified defense research. The debris was loaded onto unmarked trucks and disappeared, supposedly sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for further analysis. The analysis team was disbanded, scattered to different assignments across the country. Dr. Kellerman was transferred to Alaska. Dr. Morrison retired early with a full pension and a warning to keep his mouth shut forever. But they couldn't erase what I'd learned about the materials themselves. The fragment I'd examined so closely had shown me that our understanding of physics was incomplete, that materials could exist with properties we'd never imagined. In the weeks that followed, I found myself questioning everything I'd been taught about science, about reality, about the fundamental nature of existence itself. If beings from somewhere else could create materials like this, if they possessed technology this advanced, what did that mean for humanity's place in the universe? My faith, which had sustained me through the war and guided my moral compass since childhood, began to crumble. I'd been raised to believe that humans were God's special creation, made in His image, granted dominion over the earth. But if we shared the universe with beings whose technology made ours look like stone tools, if we were just one species among many scattered across the cosmos, what did that mean for everything the Church had taught me? Were we truly special, or were we simply primitive inhabitants of a backwater planet, noticed by our betters only when we stumbled across their crashed vehicles? The psychological impact of those 3 weeks in July 1947 extended far beyond professional curiosity or patriotic duty. Every night when I closed my eyes, I saw those symbols glowing under ultraviolet light, felt that strange electrical tingle when the material responded to my touch. But it wasn't just the technology that haunted me. It was the implications of what that technology represented about our place in creation itself. I'd grown up in a small town in Ohio where Sunday morning church attendance was as regular as sunrise. My father was a Methodist minister who preached about mankind's special relationship with the Almighty, about how we were fashioned in God's image and granted dominion over all the earth. Those sermons had shaped my worldview, given me confidence that human beings occupied a unique position in the divine plan. When I looked up at the stars as a boy, I saw the heavens declaring God's glory, with earth as the central stage where His greatest drama was unfolding. But handling those fragments in the New Mexico desert forced me to confront possibilities that my childhood faith had never prepared me for. If beings from other worlds possessed technology this advanced, if they could travel between stars while we were still celebrating the breaking of the sound barrier, what did that mean for human exceptionalism? Were we truly the crown of creation, or were we cosmic children playing with simple tools while adults conducted business we couldn't comprehend? The metallurgical analysis I conducted over those 3 weeks revealed materials that challenged every principle I'd learned at MIT. One fragment, no larger than a playing card, demonstrated memory properties that defied explanation. When I bent it into impossible shapes, applying force that should have permanently deformed any known metal, the material would slowly return to its original configuration over the course of several hours. The molecular structures seemed to remember its intended shape and actively work to restore itself, like biological healing but in an inorganic substance. Another piece exhibited what I can only describe as dimensional instability. Under certain lighting conditions, it appeared to have depth and thickness that didn't match its physical measurements. When I tried to measure its exact dimensions with calipers, the readings would change depending on the angle of approach. Sometimes it measured 3 millimeters thick, sometimes 7, sometimes values that made no mathematical sense. It was as if the material existed partially in our 3-dimensional space, and partially somewhere else entirely. Dr. Kellerman and I spent hours trying to understand the energy properties we were observing. The electrical amplification effect wasn't just mysterious, it was revolutionary. We documented instances where the material would output more energy than we input, apparently drawing power from sources we couldn't detect or measure. Our instruments showed no radiation, no chemical reactions, no conventional energy conversion processes. The additional power seemed to manifest from nothing, violating the first law of thermodynamics in ways that should have been impossible. One evening, working alone in the lab after the other analysts had returned to their quarters, I made a discovery that shook me to my core. I was examining a fragment under high magnification when I noticed what appeared to be internal structures, microscopic geometric patterns that seemed to move and shift even as I watched. At first, I thought it was an optical illusion caused by eye strain in the late hour. But when I adjusted the focus and lighting, the patterns became more distinct. They looked like circuits, but circuits designed according to principles I'd never encountered. Instead of following linear pathways like human electronics, these patterns seemed to flow in three-dimensional spirals, connecting at points that created nodes of concentrated activity. As I watched, the patterns would pulse with faint luminescence, cycling through sequences that appeared deliberate and purposeful. It was as if the material itself was alive, processing information or maintaining some kind of internal activity, even separated from its original structure. I documented everything I could, taking photographs and detailed notes, but when I tried to show Dr. Kellerman the next morning, the internal patterns had changed. They were still there, still active, but organized differently, as if the material had reconfigured itself overnight. Kellerman examined the fragments for hours, confirming my observations but unable to explain what we were seeing. We were looking at technology so advanced that it functioned more like biology than engineering. The implications began eating away at my faith like acid through metal. If beings could create materials that seemed to blur the line between matter and consciousness, between the physical and the metaphysical, what did that mean for our understanding of the soul? Was consciousness something uniquely divine, or was it simply a property of sufficiently advanced organization, something that could be engineered into matter itself? I started having conversations with the base chaplain, Father Mackenzie, trying to reconcile what I'd witnessed with my religious beliefs. But I couldn't tell him specifics, couldn't explain why I was suddenly questioning everything I'd believed about God and creation. He assumed I was dealing with general wartime trauma, recommended prayer and faith as remedies for doubt. His answers felt hollow, inadequate for the existential crisis I was experiencing. The fragments I examined showed evidence of manufacturing techniques that seemed to manipulate matter at the atomic level. Surface analysis revealed structures too precise to have been created by any mechanical process, too perfect to represent natural formation. It was as if the materials had been assembled atom by atom, with each molecule placed according to some vast design that extended beyond the visible fragment. We were looking at engineering that treated physical matter the way a writer treats words, arranging fundamental building blocks of reality into patterns that served purposes we couldn't comprehend. Dr. Morrison's medical reports, which I glimpsed before they were classified and locked away, described biological entities that challenged our understanding of life itself. According to his preliminary findings, the beings possessed physiological systems that seemed designed for different atmospheric conditions, different gravitational fields, different environmental pressures than anything found on Earth. Their brain-to-body ratio was significantly larger than human proportions, suggesting cognitive capabilities that might dwarf our own intelligence. But it was the cellular analysis that really disturbed Morrison. He found evidence of biological processes that seemed to incorporate inorganic elements, cells that functioned more like living machines than purely biological tissue. The boundary between their technology and their biology appeared to be non-existent, as if they had evolved or engineered themselves into beings where consciousness, biology, and technology merged into something entirely new. The psychological pressure of carrying this knowledge while maintaining secrecy became overwhelming. I'd look at my fellow officers during briefings and wonder how they could discuss conventional military matters when we'd just discovered evidence that humanity wasn't alone in the universe. I'd sit through church services listening to sermons about God's plan for mankind, while knowing that plan was far more complex than any of us had imagined. The weight of the secret was crushing, but the weight of its implications was even heavier. Margaret noticed the change in me immediately when I returned to our quarters each evening. I'd always been able to share my work with her, discussing engineering challenges and scientific discoveries over dinner. But now there was a wall between us, a barrier I couldn't cross without violating my oath and potentially endangering her life. She'd ask about my day, and I'd give vague responses about routine materials testing. She'd try to engage me in conversations about our future plans, and I'd struggle to focus on earthly concerns when my mind was grappling with cosmic questions. That summer in Roswell stripped away every comforting certainty I'd carried since childhood, leaving me face to face with a universe far stranger and more magnificent than any sermon had prepared me for. The metal fragments I analyzed weren't just advanced technology. They were proof that consciousness, intelligence, and purpose exist on scales that make human civilization seem like a brief flicker in an infinite cosmos. I'm telling you this because humanity deserves to know we're not alone. We've never been alone. And the truth about our place in creation is both more humbling and more wonderful than we've ever dared imagine.